Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo and Overwatch news wrap-up video where we give our thoughts on the happenings of the week. This is our 16th episode in this series, so feel free to catch up on any back episodes, and turn on subscription notifications to be alerted of new episodes. Now this week, we need to start things off with a big discussion about loot crates or loot boxes. And this discussion involves both Overwatch as well as the future of Diablo. Now, earlier this week, I posted a loot box opening video for Overwatch, and apparently I've been out of the loop because the past few weeks have seen a huge controversy over loot boxes in video games. So I decided to catch up on what was going on, and we'll summarize the situation as it is right now. What brought things to a boil were a few newly released games or games that will be coming out soon in which it's been revealed that these games will have loot boxes, effectively. And these are games that are AAA titles, $60 full price games that will also have microtransactions via loot boxes. And not only will they have loot boxes, but they will have pay-to-win elements within these loot boxes. In other words, you can spend real money to get a loot box that might give you something that gives you a mechanical in-game advantage. Now, there's been a lot of negative public reaction to this, and the public tried to make an appeal to the ESRB to crack down on this sort of behavior from game publishers or developers. The ESRB is the Entertainment Software Rating Board. They're the ones that determine whether a game is rated T for teen, 18+, adults only, and by ESRB rating, games that involve gambling are rated adults only. And most big box retailers won't sell adults only games. So the idea is that developers would be disincentivized from making loot boxes if their games are going to get an adults-only rating because of inclusion of gambling. Well, the ESRB responded by saying that they don't consider loot boxes gambling. The reason being that they always include some reward. You're always going to get something. You're never left empty-handed. And they compare this to collectible card games where you buy a card pack and you're just not sure what you're going to get in there. The cards may be crap, but at least you still have those crap cards, so you have actually purchased something. And it seems most countries don't consider loot boxes gambling. The other major rating system you would have heard of is PEGI, which is the Pan-European Game Information Rating System. And they basically said, hey, it's not our job to determine what is and is not gambling. Quote, if a gambling commission would state that loot boxes are a form of gambling, then we would have to adjust our criteria to that. So they just wash their hands of that, but it turns out that a gambling commission has ruled on this. The United Gambling Commission did rule some time ago that loot boxes are not gambling. The reason being that the prizes are restricted to within the game only. And that basically takes us to where we are now, and this place being a growing disconnect in how we feel and what these organizations are saying. And I believe it boils down to the semantics of the legal definition of gambling. For me personally, gambling means risking losing something important in order for potential gain. And so while this might not be the legal definition, I think it is a lot closer to the psychological definition, and it is the psychological implications that are far more important. The argument that it's not gambling because you always receive something, in my opinion, is a terrible argument, because the something that you might receive could be completely worthless. If I open a loot box in Overwatch and all I get is sprays and player icons, to me that is worthless. I understand some people like those, but to me that is not a good loot box. Even in games that allow you to resell the contents of a loot box, if the items you get are garbage, you're probably going to resell them for garbage, and then it's just tantamount to getting a discounted loot box. It's like, instead of paying $5 for my loot box, I paid $4.50, because I sold the extra junk for 50 cents. No, what's more important here is not the semantics, but rather what's going on psychologically when you're either pulling a lever on a slot machine or opening a loot box. In both cases, you are expending money, knowing that you will potentially get nothing of value to you, in the hopes that you do get something that is rare that will be valuable to you. And if you do win, you do get something that you want, you get a rush of dopamine. It's a chemical response in our brain, and it is chemical responses in our brains that create dependencies, addictions. When you hear about people getting addicted to gambling, it's not because, oh, it's fun to do this with my arm, it's what's going on in the brain. It's the dopamine rush. And it's been proven in psychological experiments that unexpected rushes of dopamine give us a bigger rush than when it's expected. In other words, it's a greater thrill to have a chance to not get what we want and then get it, rather than just buy what we want. And the reason this is troubling for the future of Diablo, for instance, is that an action RPG, the loot hunt game, is a type of game that revolves entirely around this. Diablo is just an elaborate slot machine. What keeps you playing is the loot hunt. Yes, there are fun mechanics in and of itself within the game, but imagine playing Diablo with no loot, no item drops. You'd grow tired of it rather quickly. Anytime you kill a monster, anytime you gamble at Kadala, because yes, there's even direct gambling in the game, you're pulling on a slot machine and you're hoping to get something. And when you get that thing that you wanted, you get that rush. And it's the thrill of that rush that keeps you playing. And this is why, in theory, Diablo 4 could go in a dangerous direction. The reason being that Blizzard is establishing a precedent of introducing microtransaction loot boxes into its games. At first it was just Hearthstone, then it was Overwatch, and then they reworked Heroes of the Storm to go from a microtransaction game in which you could directly buy the cosmetics you wanted to a game in which you have to buy loot boxes in order to maybe randomly get what you want. This tells us that Blizzard has realized that the loot box method is very successful, is a very good way at getting us to fork over money. And why is that? As we said, it's more exciting to gamble on getting that skin than it is to outright buy that skin. Logically, we want to be able to just buy the skin, but we'll be manipulated psychologically into paying more and more for loot boxes. And no, we're not all susceptible to this. But for those who are, they're gonna spend enough money to make up for the people that refuse to. The question should not be, are loot boxes gambling or not? The question should be, are loot boxes unethical or not? And at their core, loot boxes are designed to get us to spend more money. Now, I saw some discussion within the Diablo community about the possibility of microtransactions in Diablo 4, and it seems a lot of people are okay with the existence of microtransactions as long as they are not in the form of loot boxes. In other words, you get to buy exactly what you want rather than gamble. Then on the Overwatch side of things, it seems most in the Overwatch community are cool with loot boxes. They're okay with the current implementation of the system, that it's just cosmetics, there's no pay-to-win element. In general, though, the sentiment does seem to lean more towards, well, we don't love that it's loot boxes, but if we're gonna have loot boxes, this is at least the best way to implement loot boxes, and any other game that has loot boxes should do it this way. But I'd like to know, where do you folks fall on this? Personally, I'm opposed strongly to anything that is pay to win, whether it's loot boxes or other forms of microtransactions. So if we're just talking about cosmetic microtransactions, then I would prefer that there were no microtransactions. I would rather just pay $60 for a game up front and then not another dime unless it's like a big expansion pack. But I recognize that microtransactions are a venue to fund further development of a game. I recognize that Diablo 3 did not receive more ongoing support because it's the only Blizzard title with no ongoing monetization model. So for this reason, I'm not opposed to including optional cosmetic microtransactions for those who want to pay that, for those who have the money, and for those who want to show their support to the developers in that way. I personally have spent money on microtransactions in Heroes of the Storm. That is to say, in the old system, before they introduced loot boxes. It's a game that I played for a year straight, every day. I figured this game is free. I normally would pay $60 for a game that I would play this much. I'm okay with spending some money on skins. But I personally would not spend money on gambling on a loot box. Now you might argue, oh, Rhykker's a hypocrite. You just put up that loot box opening video. Well, yeah, because that's for work. I've literally only ever done that for videos. The first time I ever spent money on loot boxes was to make a video, and you saw that first video. That was in 2016, I believe. It was the first Halloween event for Overwatch, and you can see how conflicted I felt over buying the loot boxes. But it was so that I could make a video basically showing the experience of, what am I gonna get in these loot boxes? Do I regret spending this money? It's sort of a review for people considering buying loot boxes. And it's a form of voyeurism for people who would never spend the money but would like to see someone's reaction who does spend the money. The previous two Overwatch events, I did not do loot box opening videos because I determined that they were just not profitable to make. And in those events, I hardly got any skins because I did not spend a dime on loot boxes. So that said, while I personally am not someone who would want to spend money on loot boxes, I recognize that there is that appeal. And by this I mean there's obviously some appeal to gambling in general. There's an appeal to casinos. People don't go to casinos for the most part. Most people don't go to casinos with the belief that they're gonna win money. They go there with the hope to win money, but what they're paying for, really, gambling is effectively paying for the experience, the rush, the thrill of maybe winning money. Because while it sucks when you don't win, it's a rush when you do. And people are paying for that rush. So if you like loot boxes, I get it. I get that appeal. That doesn't appeal to me. I wouldn't go to a casino. I wouldn't gamble, but I recognize it's a huge industry. And it's an industry because a lot of people do seek that. But this takes us to the matter of age restricting for children. Now, I'm of two minds of this, and I have to preface this by saying I'm not a parent. And any of you who are parents, your opinion is automatically more valid than mine. But as someone who is not a parent, I have to say that I believe it falls to the parents to ensure that young children don't have access to your money. That young children can't buy loot boxes. That's just one side of this. I do think the greater debate here is not about the risk of your child spending money on loot boxes and getting addicted to gambling in that way, but rather a culture that promotes gambling. What kind of message is that sending to children? And that's a trickier topic. Do we want all games to be promoting behaviors similar to gambling and maybe raise a generation of kids to be more accepting of going to casinos and risking money? And this is where the ethics of things really get tricky, and I'd like to know how you folks feel about that. Now, the big argument here is, hey, if you don't support loot boxes, don't buy loot boxes. If you don't support microtransactions, don't buy microtransactions. If you don't support companies or games that use these methods, stop giving them your money. And while that's all good and well to say, that doesn't always work, that's not always enough. Sometimes a stronger message needs to be sent, and sometimes in the case of addicting behaviors, like getting addicted to dopamine rushes, we do need some form of higher level of intervention, some higher level of regulation. Because as much as a smoker can recognize that smoking is bad for him, the knowledge that it's bad for him isn't always enough to stop him from smoking. But I don't know. What I really want to know is what you folks think. Help me form my opinion on this. Alright, now quickly into the Diablo news, and the rest of this video will be a lot shorter. If you're here just for Overwatch, skip ahead to the time indicated above. We have what should be our final round of patch notes on the test server that went out. We're seeing a small buff to the Jade Harvester build. This should bring it on par or close to with the top builds. We're seeing a small buff to the Shadow's Mantle build. This is after the nerf, so this should bring the Shadow's Mantle build back up to about on par with the top build, which is multi-shot. We're seeing, for Witch Doctors, a nerf to the Firebat's Staff, which is a nerf to the Rhykker and Helltooth Firebats builds, but we're also seeing a buff to the Helltooth set and the Rhykker set to compensate, and this is to sort of promote more than just Firebat builds for those two sets. What effect this ultimately has is that it brings the Helltooth pet build a little closer up to being a top build. For Barbarian, we're seeing a buff to the Bolcathos set. This is sort of a buff for the Whirlwind build. Whirlwind build, best items is the Istvan set, Little Rogue and Slanderer. This makes Bolcathos a more inviting option, possibly a better option, we'll have to run the numbers. For Crusader, we're seeing a small buff to the Akan set. This buffs Captain America, Condemn, Holy Shotgun builds, and we're also seeing a buff to Hammerdin for some reason. I'm still confused by the Hammerdin buffs. Hammerdin's been the king for a long time. I think it's okay to let the king rest for a bit. For the Demon Hunter, we're seeing a Marauder buff. Again, this brings it closer to multi-shot, possibly on par. We're seeing a buff to the Natalia set. This will make it a lot more viable. It's not going to be a top build, but it's by no means a bad build. I personally don't like the playstyle of the Natalia, the best Natalia builds, but it is by no means not viable. Then we're seeing a nerf to the Pestilence set for Necromancer. Now, Pestilence was looking like it could have surpassed Trag'Oul's, the best build in the game, so the hope is that this isn't going to make it weaker than that, but maybe just bring it to on par. We'll have to see. Also, the buff to Helltooth for the Witch Doctor is more significant than the buff to Rhykker. Helltooth was a little over-nerfed, so hopefully they're going to be more neck and neck now. And then lastly, the Shrouded Moors are coming back to Greater Rifts after they had been removed due to complaints. Lastly, in Diablo news, the BlizzCon goodie bag was revealed, so we now see what we get. You've been seeing this in my videos for some time now. This is the pet that we get for a BlizzCon ticket or a BlizzCon virtual ticket. It is a Murloc Necromancer. Alright, on to Overwatch news. The Halloween patch went live this week. Junkenstein's Revenge is back with a vengeance because there is a little bit more to it. It's the same old Junkenstein, but now you can play a few more heroes and there's a new boss. I won't spoil the surprise, but you probably know by now. Along with the Halloween patch came some additional patch notes on changes we've previously discussed in past videos. We'll put the patch notes in the description below if you want to check that out. The biggest thing for me about the Halloween event was all the skins. There were so many really good skins. 8 skins in total were released, but they were of such great quality. I'm really impressed, blown away. This is possibly, of all the patches, the patch that had the best skins. And it looks like every leaked skin that we showed in last week's video, all those skins, all those leaks were true. And Cthulhu Zenyatta has the coolest voice lines. You folks have to check that out in-game. The BlizzCon virtual goodies were revealed. For Overwatch, we're getting this Winston skin. This is if you have a physical BlizzCon ticket or even just a virtual ticket, and virtual tickets are still available. And then to end this video, I just wanted to highlight 3, I suppose, fan skins. And this is by Reddit user Chatty Window. This is the same person who brought us Dad Ass from last week's video. This is Symmetra in McCree's Van Helsing skin, and it looks super cool. The Van Helsing skin is one of my favorite skins in the game, and it even looks awesome on Symmetra. Kind of makes her look like Vala, the Diablo 3 Demon Hunter. And then continuing along the lines and things that we cannot unsee, this is now McCree in Symmetra's new skin. And then the last fan skin that I want to highlight here is addressing a complaint that a lot of people have about the Dracula Reaper skin, that his head just kind of looks awkward. Sort of seeing that shiny noggin without a cover on it is kind of off-putting. So Twitter user Spoopy Radio showed his take on Dracula Reaper, and holy crap. I wish Blizzard would make this as an option for the Reaper Dracula skin. And that wraps up this week's video, folks. But again, leave a comment on your thoughts. This is where we get to discuss everything that happens in the week. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Overwatch and Diablo content.